Hello everybody, it's Dave Neal, stand-up comic, host of Bachelor Nation News. In this video, we have Bachelor podcaster Nick Viall reacting to the big mistake by Bachelor producers, which was to let Devin onto the show, given the fact that there was a restraining order and there was a police record as far as a break-in, burglary. I mean, wild stuff, right? So here's his response. Let's dive into it. This is from, I believe, yesterday's podcast episode. And it's interesting. It's whenever there's an issue like this, it's interesting to hear from people who have been on the show what they have to say about how this could have been slipped through the cracks. Now, I don't need to relitigate the whole point. You guys already remember the affidavit that suggested he lit a restraining order on fire. There was one thing that said he put a hole in a wall from throwing a phone, had her in a chokehold, all these different things.
And covering my mouth. There's a lot of different layers of stalking, burglary, and then potential physical assaults.
He also spit on her and threw his drink on her in front of everyone in the stands.
Yeah, some truly horrific shit.
Agreed.
Truly.
Yeah.
Which he's apologized since, but I don't know if we want to jump into the restraining order before we get to his apology.
Well, I don't really care. Devin's apology?
Yeah, I mean, he posted an apology.
Devin, did he really apologize?
No.
Not really.
It was more of a, I took it as more of a denial.
He was never, it was there.
He apologized to Jen, but not for the old stuff. He said it was kind of all mischaracterization. When Reality Steve did his live stream exposing all of this, there was someone in the comment section claiming to be Devin, saying they were going to go on Nick Viall's podcast. Clearly that didn't happen. That would have been on Thursday. Whether it was Devin or not, I really don't know. It could have been, and Nick could have said, well, put it this way. If I'm Nick, I don't want to go near this story. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't want to go near it. Devin would have to go do this on your own, and I'm the same way. I wouldn't take this story. It's just not worth it to try to interview someone who might have had done that, because obviously he pleaded guilty to a plea deal, which admitted to burglary. So the show should have never let him on. The question now is, how did they let this happen?
There was never a restraining order. That was dropped.
It's like we got back together or some bullshit like that.
He used the words misconstrued. So he's like, it was misconstrued what the restraining order was. It was me with a relationship in the past and being young and not realizing how to deal with it.
And by the way, if it is misconstrued at this point, the only person that Devin can get to convince people otherwise is that lady who filed the restraining order to speak on behalf of Devin. I don't think he should do that. I'm just saying at this point, either make your own video refuting it all, share whatever evidence you have, but no one's going to want to touch this, rightfully so.
And that he reconciled with this ex before breaking off.
He used a lot of terms to minimize what he did by saying, I'm not proud in a lapse in judgment and whatnot, where it's like, no, you made very strong choices that had legal repercussions.
By the way, I actually have to give these producers credit. They're actually sharing source material. In the past, it was so annoying. Someone said this, or, and they would kind of conflate things, but they're doing a good job.
It wasn't there also threats of violence in there as well?
Yeah, so that's the put me in a chokehold, covered my mouth, spit on me. There's different.
Well, that's actual violence.
Yeah.
Didn't he say I'll kill you or something?
It's something like that.
He also threatened the ex-girlfriend's best friend as well, saying that he was going to beat him up and using homosexual slurs.
And then a friend came out after Devin's post. I didn't take it as an apology. I took it as essentially a denial.
Yeah, that's what it was,
and reinforced everything that's been out there in terms of this restraining order. It's all terrible. And then there's apparently Gil, the Golden Bachelor, one of the men on Jones' season.
Now, Gil, the Golden Bachelor, this temporary restraining order that came out on him actually came out after the background check. It's more recent, which you can understand how that would slip through the background check cracks, because it's you can't do the background check the day they arrive. It takes probably a few weeks for them to do, but it doesn't make it any less scary. Came
out just recently that he too has a restraining order currently out against him. There's a lot of people obviously in reality TV space, fans of the show, fans of Bachelor Nation. I think a lot of the uproar, and rightfully so. I mean, this is a terrible look on the franchise. I mean, to think about how the show is filmed, fantasy suites, off camera, in privacy, the expectation of engagement. Yeah, the show ends, but you go off into the real world and you interact with whoever the show introduces you to. And Jen was in a relationship with this, what we seem to be dangerous man. My question for you, Emily, is I think there's a lot, how the question out there is, how could the show not find this? And I think what's even scarier, and I talked with you a little bit over the weekend, is just how difficult it can be for some of these networks. And again, I'm not trying to alleviate any wrongdoing that the show may or may not have done. I just think when you find out, like you get the impression if you don't know where to look, you might not find. And then you think about the scale of which any of these shows, forget about Bachelor Nation, any show that's potentially reviewing hundreds of different potential cast people, and they narrow it down. They have to do background checks on all these people. So how do background...
By the way, so before Emily answers, my thought with the Clayton scenario was interesting because you really needed people to point you in the right direction to know what to look for with some of these past restraining orders. Again, with the Clayton scenario, with his ex fleeing Laura Owens, you had to know to go to Maricopa County. You had to know to go to San Francisco. Not every court system, it seems, talks. So is there a way where, because this, restraining order, because there was a plea deal, and because he didn't violate that plea deal, that 1 year probation, is there a way where it wasn't expunged, but it was no longer on your base record, kind of like a credit score? And again, I don't have the answer to this, but like a credit score, it's like, all right, after 7 years, that bad credit goes away, so you have a chance to redeem yourself. Is that how it could possibly work? And if so, is that why they didn't find this? Versus Steve, clearly someone sent him the information. Someone said you have to know where to look. So the show would have done their background check on Devin. And again, I'm not sort of letting the show off the hook. I'm just saying, boy, it would be nice if they broke down the blend, the proprietary blend of what they do for their background checks so that they can improve on it.
Checks work in general. And can you articulate why ABC, Disney, Warner Brothers, two giant entities with a lot of resources who produce this show, why something like this might not be caught?
It's interesting because I wonder which third-party entity they're having do this. I imagine the network has hired a company to do the background checks, maybe show by show, maybe franchise by franchise. But background checks really heavily, depending on how they're done, will swoop public records. When you're talking about things that happen maybe in a family court, not a criminal court, oftentimes records can be sealed. And again, that's not to say the network shouldn't dig deeper, because in a show like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, the thing you're worried about the most are things that might be in family court. A criminal felony conviction is going to be really easy to find most of the time. But there were times, and I think I mentioned this when we were talking, there were times even at the DA's office, we would run background checks on in-custody defendants. We have fingerprints, Social Security, photo, and we would still miss convictions from other jurisdictions because all those computer systems don't talk to each other well. So depending on how you run the background check, you might not find things even from other jurisdictions within the same state. It can be a challenge. How the networks deal with making sure the contestants are upfront about that would be a very interesting thing. I imagine there are tons of waivers signed. You sign away.
He definitely.
Yeah, so Devin must have signed that he didn't have any restraining orders. If anyone's applied for a job, if you had any felonies recently, that way if they don't catch it, you're still on the hook if maybe you lied about something.
He signed a waiver.
This is true. I mean, are we going to see the networks turning around and suing contestants if they're not truthful on those waivers and maybe handle it that way if something does get missed?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had to sign something, say I've never been arrested or convicted of whatever.
And then there's another issue is, especially when we're dealing with restraining orders, normally the process is you get a temporary restraining order, and that is an immediate, like, this is something that needs to be issued now. The things that are said in the TRO aren't run past the other party. It is just I need this now. And the court system is like, look, if somebody is in danger, it's better to get the temporary restraining order in place and then fight over whether it should be made permanent down the road. That is the balance that the court system takes to get it done quickly. So then you've got a temporary restraining order. If it never becomes permanent, is that a conviction? That's not really a conviction. It was a temporary restraining order that never became permanent.
This is the point that I think Devin was trying to argue. Again, I'm not saying he did a good job, was that he said that there was no restraining order against him. And the fact is, well, it would have expired at this point. And the permanent, and again, I don't know if they're going to get into this, but the restraining order that exists was a mutual agreement between Devin and his ex. So the temporary restraining order, you have 28 days, 4 weeks, a month, whatever it is, to where the judge says, knock it off. No one's talking to each other till we figure it out. At that point, she accused him of violating it 4 different times. Phone calls, they talked at a bar. Even if she, the victim, consents to a phone call, he would still be violating the restraining order. Like at that point, it's not up to her; it's a restraining order. So it's the actual type of restraining order that they ended up with was one that was both of them agreeing to not talk to the other person, and with his plea deal that he made, which I think he pled guilty to some lower level break-in and entering, something on the lower level, I believe. With that, it said 1 year of probation, 1 year of drug checks, and if you pass that, then it's done. So that would still be very manipulative of him to think that means like it never existed.
But that doesn't mean there was never a restraining order.
Bingo.
But if somebody's playing words, it's like, well, technically it's a TRO, not a full restraining order. We saw this play out with Sheena and Rachel too on Vanderpump, where Rachel went and said Sheena had punched her in New York after WHL and got the temporary restraining order. And when they went to court for the final, Rachel didn't show up to court and the whole thing got dropped. But how do you call that a restraining order? Do you call that a temporary restraining order? And so there's room for people to play games there. And when I read his statement, that's how I read it, is that he was playing games in the fine lines of they resolved it, but it seemed that they resolved it for some of a stay away from me and I'll stay away from you, and we won't make this a 5-year restraining order, which can have more impact.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, what also seems scary. It sounds like if there's an incident where the victim maybe just wants to move on
wants it to go away, whatever that person did, there seems to be maybe even less access to that information, or it's, like you can like someone like Devin, could he have in any way influenced the difficulty of how something like this is searched or found? Not necessarily. It really depends on how the court system itself reports it. Family courts can be difficult to get information out of because they deal with child custody. They deal a lot with child placement, kids that are taken out of the home. You can deal with very sensitive topics that you don't necessarily need to be searchable. And then when court records are sealed, you can often see that something happened, but can't see what happened.
Exactly. And we saw this with Laura Owens and Clayton Echard. I mean, one of the ways in which she would torment these men is that she would deal with them in family court and then try to get the records sealed. And even if they weren't sealed, like the Mike Maricini records from San Francisco weren't sealed, they were still hard to find. You had to show up in person. You had to know what you were looking for. You had to know what the case number was. So I do think there's a scenario where Bachelor producers ran their typical check and it didn't play. But like Emily says, they need to do a better job of running a better check, because most of the issues you would worry about in a show about relationships, domestic relationships, the issues that you're worried about are what would show up in family court. So interesting stuff. And again, in a world of Bachelor hot takes, it's nice to get a lawyer who actually knows what the hell they're talking about. It doesn't mean Bachelor's let off the hook, but it does mean there was probably some legal wiggle room for the way Devin described what happened. And will the show come after him? I have no idea. I mean, it depends what he said. It depends what he said and if they feel like they've got proof that he lied to them. We'll have to see how it all plays out. He's lawyered up. He's got, crisis PR people, and we'll have to see. It's kind of like that quiet, maybe it's the eye of the storm for him, where he's been quiet. But after his initial denial, does he A, let this thing go away, or does he fight it? My guess is if everything's accurate, which it looks like it is, he just swallows it and goes and moves on with his life. Don't ruffle these feathers. Just be done here. That's my advice. Let me know what you guys think. We'll be back with the Rush Hour podcast. You can scan this code right here if you want to listen to it. We'll have all of your entertainment news in one place. That's up next.